This episode of EMS One-Stop is brought to you by Lexipol, the experts in policy, training, wellness support and grants assistance for first responders and government leaders. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's Lexipol.com. Hello and welcome back to another edition of EMS One-Stop. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence, and today we're going to do what the British do all the time, and that's talk, moan, complain, discuss the weather. We do. It's a thing. If you're watching in the UK, you know I'm right. Anyway, since I've been in the US for the last 16 years, and I've got a list here and I've been listing it, I've been through directivos, clipper systems, hurricanes, fires, thunder, floods, heat, cool, snow, warnings and watches, work out what's the difference. And also that classic, if you've ever done emergency operations centres, the classic argument that you have with everybody over which local TV meteorologist you take your weather from, despite the fact there's probably somebody from the National Weather Centre sitting next to you. To have that discussion, to exercise some of those those ideas I've just presented to you, I'm delighted to welcome in this edition of EMS One-Stop, Sunny Wescott, who is the Chief Meteorologist for the Department of Homeland Security. And so, Sunny, welcome to EMS One-Stop.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So you heard my introduction. Did I kind of cover everything we want to talk about today? And we can break it down into parts.
There's definitely a litany of different weather events that we could touch on, depending on what continent we want to speak to, what region, what threat matrix. There's a flavor for everybody.
Excellent. And so as this vodcast and podcast go out, and remember, by the way, before we get going, we are both on video on YouTube and also on wherever you get your podcast from. So if you want to watch us, you can. If you want to listen to us, you can do that as well. So before we go forward then, we are in a weather scenario right now. A week or so ago, during the inauguration, of course, they had to go indoors because of the weather. We had the polar vortex. We have Santa Ana winds going on in California, of course, fueling and feeding the fires. Previously, we had this phenomenon, the atmospheric river. I could go on. What's going on with the weather right now?
Yeah, so I know a lot of people remember the heat waves that we saw last year and a couple of the years most recently prior. The trending that we've seen in the abnormal heating during the spring and the summer actually fuel a lot of our winter weather patterns. So if you think about all of our highs and our lows or actual weather phenomena, they move like horses on a carousel from the west to the east, moving across the entire northern hemisphere. So everything that goes from the US goes over to Europe for the most part, which then goes over to Russia, China, through the Koreas, out through the Pacific Ocean. Then it comes back over to the North American continent, either through Alaska, Canada, or the US. So that belt of storm systems, when you have an abnormal temperature swing, can cause them to go higher to the north, lower to the south, take on greater intensity, stronger wind profiles, more heavy precipitation of all forms. It's really a whole pattern shift that you have to remember that if you see it earlier in the year, you're going to see it cascade and carry, much like the butterfly effect or the ripple effect does.
I'm a great fan of that butterfly in the Himalayas. When it flaps its wings, it causes all sorts of chaos. And we're certainly seeing that now. So I should have asked this question first, but of course, Sunny, define your role within the Department of Homeland Security. How are you getting the information you're getting? And of course, how are you disseminating it to everybody? And for full disclosure, Sunny and I sit on a federal group that meets every 2 weeks, and I get to enjoy Sunny's analysis on a regular basis. But sort of take us back to the how do you do it and what do you do?
Yeah, so I'm a prior Air Force lead meteorologist. So I'm enlisted trained and I did operational forecasts. So a lot of the troop movements, drop zones, resource allocation, flight paths, a lot of different weather data specific to operations. So when I came over to DHS, I did a lot with critical infrastructure. So I'm the extreme weather outreach in regards to critical infrastructure specifically. So looking at supply chain, looking at each of our 16 critical infrastructure sectors, everything from nuclear to the dam sector to energy to IT. Like our data centers, all of the built infrastructure against these worsening weather events. What's too much rain? What is too much wind? How much lightning is too much? Is lightning in a particular area worse than another area? Who's hardened what where? A lot of my general outreach is providing the information on trend analysis for each of the 8 main weather hazards being amplified by the uneven distribution of heating we were just talking about. So each of these hazards now taking on greater damage tolls, the critical infrastructure itself also getting older. So being able to couple up both of those things, the meteorological and the physical nature of the actual built infrastructure, and then looking at it as it's happening internationally, looking at the supply chain implications, best practices, who's doing what where to mitigate some of these threats, and can we bring those best practices to the US and adjust them for our infrastructure, making sure that there's a lot of cross collaboration, breaking down some of those silos when it comes to that data and that best practice also. So there's never a shortage of work on my side.
There's never nothing to do. And I just want to make a comment on something you said. You said the word heat, right? And so for those folk that are sitting in or were sitting in that polar vortex, how can you reconcile that against the fact of global warming? I mean, where do the two correlate together?
Yeah, so a lot of people, when they see significantly cold temperatures or heavy precipitation in snow and ice, they think, well, surely this will be a benefit for the coming year. It'll reduce heat. It'll reduce the impacts of drought and evaporation, wildfire threats. However, when you look at the trend analysis over the years, when you have uneven warming throughout the earlier part of the year and the amplification change that brings for your low pressures, your high pressures, your highs are now sitting over you longer. So the clear skies during the winter, that's where you go outside and you have cold air damming, and that's damaging to our crops, our pipes, our power lines. Too much cold in any one area is bad. And then your frontal boundaries that come in are stronger. So you have that heavier dumping of snow, but you're seeing that your lows are not coming across in the same length. Now that's problematic because you're seeing all of your entire winter occurring in a handful of events. And now you're saying, well, it's great that we're getting all the snow. We needed that snow. Yes, but you didn't need that much snow at once. You needed it evenly distributed over time. So what's changing when you see the uneven heating is that it's changing the frequency and the intensity of your storm systems. You needed smaller storms continuously, and now you're getting big storms every once in a while. And those big storms are producing everything the small storms would have over that even period. It's what we built to. Not to say that those weather events are novel. They're not brand new. You know, we've had flooding, we've had coastal flooding, we've had tornadoes, hail, lightning strikes. Some of these areas haven't seen some of the weather events, but the weather events themselves aren't new. Now, the problem is that they're moving into areas ill-prepared or areas which had not experienced them since we've lived there, which means we didn't build to that standard. We built to the average. So these extremes are taking heavier hits on our stuff.
Right, and recently we've had snow in New Orleans, and of course that's a novelty. We've had snow in Florida, and of course they're used to the frost. I watch orange growers talk about the frost coming in, but actually, a foot of snow on the beach that normally has surfers and sunbathers is something that, as you say, it's an abnormal event. But of course, it's happening, and it's recently happened. And so, how do you prepare for that, and what do they do about it?
Yeah, and it's happening everywhere. We just had snow in the Saharan Desert on the dunes. We've had snow over in Dubai. They recorded that. We had 6 feet of snow in South Africa in an area ill prepared for that. So this is happening across the board. We've had the worst blizzard on record in Russia. We've had plummeting cold temperatures in Russia and the Koreas, as well as parts of China. Their ice isn't forming as thick there. They're running into industry issues. So everyone's taking hits at the same time, which is coming down to supply chain concerns. If everyone's taking hits, they're all coming to market at the same time. Crops are down. You need more concrete cement. That doesn't set as easily when the temperatures are too high. So during the summer, it's taking longer for construction projects. Your epoxy doesn't set as well either. So you're seeing that some of your bonding mechanisms are falling apart. In some countries where they use things like tar will start to melt in extreme heat. So really on the pro-con side of the house, the pro for a lot of the scientists is we're finally seeing some of the breaking points for the materials. So we knew that there were breaking points, but because they weren't being exacerbated, we didn't know what they were. A good example, steel doesn't melt in direct sunlight. We know this. It would have to get incredibly hot. However, when you buddy steel up with wood on top of gravel on cement, and then it gets very hot, the air moves in different ways, and the material all wants to dimple, shift, and twist in different ways, and they can't because they're attached. So that's where you're starting to see some of these breaking points that we wouldn't have known because we put in a lot of this infrastructure in the last 75 years. So if we're just now getting to record breaks, then we're starting to see the damage at unsubstantiated rates where we see something, they see something entirely different, they see something entirely different, and it's really coming down to a rapid need for sharing of data. So some of the things you can do about this, flood mitigation strategies, a lot of people think that means looking at the riverines, looking at the low-lying areas. You may have experienced subsidence where the ground starts to settle and lower from overpumping the aquifers, from drought, from too much sunlight. There's a lot of different reasons why your aquifers could run low and your buildings could compress in. You may have noticed it with the sidewalks dimpling, cracks in the building's foundation, settling in general. What that means is your home, your infrastructure, your site, your road might be the newest low-lying area going forward in the floods. And every flood event compresses you a little bit further. So when we're looking at each one of these problem sets, we're looking at various solutions. It's not one solution fits every problem. Just because you raise up a road in one area doesn't mean you've solved the wildfire threat, doesn't mean that you've solved what extreme heat does to the rest of your infrastructure, your park benches, your crosswalk signs, the door handles in and out of buildings, the handicap ramps. All of those in direct sunlight can cause significant burns. When you go to get CPR and somebody lays you down on the sidewalk, and now you and them are getting second to third degree burns in some of these heat events, that adds on to the medical problem as well. So not to say that there aren't solutions, but that no one solution can possibly tap every single thing going wrong. And when you have main weather hazards all amplifying, you have 16 critical infrastructure sectors, and you have all these different regions. Everything has to be addressed by sector, by region, by topography, by your general population. All of these different factors come into play.
So the weather affects everything. And when we come back after the break, I want to talk about, the weather and EMS and obviously how we react and prepare for it. But one of the big ticket items every year is the hurricane season. The 2025 hurricane season is looming in the next 4 or 5 months. What are we going to expect this year?
Yeah, so our different tropical weather events and what we're seeing across both basins, the Atlantic and the Pacific, we've seen that our storms are able to make it further inland because our low pressures are slowing down, and our continental systems really determine which way the hurricanes go when they approach the U.S. So when you see a hurricane come up to the coastline and boomerang away, it's because a frontal boundary is crossing, and frontal boundaries are these ultimate weather features that come from the top of the atmosphere down to the surface. Tropical cyclones form a lot more at the surface to mid-level, so they're far smaller. They're able to be steered by the frontal boundaries. What we're expecting to see this year is because the frontal boundaries are slowing down, they're moving further to the north, which is allowing for more drought in the south, that these tropical cyclones will have greater windows of time for landfall. They'll be able to be stronger because the water's warmer. The air is warmer, which will also feel more thunderstorms. So we're expecting to see their outer bands carry more tornadic activity, damaging hail that's larger, stronger wind gusts during the initial onset, heavier rain in the first 3 hours of landfall, and the tropical cyclone able to stay intact all the way through its path through the U.S., as opposed to falling apart within the first couple of hours of landfall. These storms are packing a greater punch. They're moving further to the north. They're strengthening further to the north. And we're expecting for this trend to carry forward. So while some forecasts may say fewer cyclones, still anticipate stronger cyclones.
So is it fair to say that's what happened in Western North Carolina this year?
Yes, not only Western North Carolina, but also in Florida, where we had EF3s affiliated with our hurricane landfalls from Milton and from Helene. Now, that's incredibly abnormal. Usually, your hurricanes produce EF0s, maybe an EF1, but the amount of heat and energy that's available from evaporative demand throughout the year, and then the heavier onset of rain initially, is really where we're starting to see this amplification of flooding in the higher elevations, damaged communities in the low-lying areas that aren't prepared for the amount that's coming in. These 1 in 1,000, 1 in 500, 1 in 100-year rainfall events aren't really conceptualized when we're building out resiliency planning. And that's becoming a problem to communicate with stakeholders, that the infrastructure is aged, your area was at risk to begin with, these weather events are getting worse, and it's all rapidly changing. And the answer can't be just pack up and move somewhere else. A lot of these communities have been there for a long time. It's really coming down to giving them the education, giving them resiliency moves, and then making sure that they can find funding for these things.
So before we go to the break, then final question. So who in a locality, whether it's a public safety sort of entity, where should they get, and this is one of those questions I sort of pose at the start, where should they get their meteorology from?
I always recommend taking it from a reliable source. So there's meteorologist communities bound in the US especially, but also on the international side. You have forecasts that Mexico does. You have forecasts that every state does. Every state has a state climatologist. Every weather station has a weather meteorologists at the local level, and then you have meteorologists for every airport. You have meteorologists for every major industry that operates in that region. So if you think about the amount of data that you can propagate as an end user by just reaching out to all of these groups, that's a lot of work. So what I recommend instead is obviously hurricane season, everyone goes to the National Hurricane Center. There's also your local National Weather Service offices. So if that one's too broad and you need to know exactly what it means for your specific county, there is a National Weather Service office page that's broken up into every single office where you can click on it and find all of the historic data that they've put out over time. You can find all of the current watches, warnings, advisories, the local weather story. So it'll give you a nice narrative, some graphics that you can use for outreach. And then, of course, the government on the DHS side of the house has ready.gov, which has all those different fact sheets, advisories, checklists for when you're evacuating, all of those great products that are all housed in one spot. So you have weather.gov and ready.gov, and both of those are really good starting points. Outside of that, if you need additional information specific to hurricanes, HurEvac is a really good tool for a lot of our emergency managers to know when to evacuate.
So all of those links actually that Sunny just mentioned will appear in the show notes and obviously in the corresponding link at the EMS One website. So look out for those, click in and follow. For the moment, Sunny, we're going to take a quick break and have a word from our sponsor.
Lexipol empowers first responders and public servants to best meet the needs of their residents safely and responsibly. Serving more than 2 million public safety and government professionals in over 8,000 agencies and municipalities, Lexipol offers a range of solutions that includes policies, training, behavioral health resources, news and analysis, and grant assistance services for law enforcement, fire and rescue, EMS, local government, and other agencies dedicated to public safety. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's LEXIPOL.com.
And we're back, and I always give a plug to my voiceover artist, Jim Dudley, of course, who is the presenter and host of Policing Matters over on policeone.com. And so this is a great public safety discussion we're having today, but also go across to Policing Matters because they are talking about some real-time, realistic stuff with Jim as well. So do that. Also, please make sure that you like and subscribe on the platform that you're either listening to us on or indeed over on YouTube. And I say this every time. We're on YouTube, so you can see us, and we're on your local podcast platform, so you can hear us. You get to choose. The advantage of coming to us on YouTube is you can see us, and also any charts, graphs, and in this case, weather maps we have on the screen for you to look at while we're talking too. So I'm talking to Sunny Wescott, who is the Chief Meteorologist at the Department of Homeland Security. And so she has a far-reaching, far-ranging set of responsibilities. But Sunny, talk about some of the products that you put out for us good folk in public safety and beyond, some of the things that we can readily access to help us think about planning our week, day, month, year.
Yeah, so I do a 10-day forecast outlooks just on the where is the worst weather going to be occurring, what kind of weather hazards are really going to be amplified, some of the new dashboards, tools, products that are made available to a lot of our emergency management community, different studies, things to be aware of, so heightened concerns. What is black ice? What is a snow squall? What is thunder snow? Some of these amplifying terms, especially during winter, freezing fog. What is the difference between hypothermia and frostbite? A lot of these are applicable to our emergency managers. Advocating for certain things like heated clothing. I have a heated jacket and heated socks. I highly recommend when you're going to be outside in the cold that you look for some of these solutions at your most local level yourself. When we have extreme heat events, I've created a wonderful EMS-specific too hot to op infographic, which is centralized on a lot of the different components of operating out in the heat for our first responders. So this includes police. A lot of them have different metal clips and components, their walkie-talkies, the radios, the different parts of their gear, their utility belt might be susceptible to extreme heat. They themselves are usually in darker clothing and thereby susceptible to extreme heat, as are their vehicles. And they may not necessarily be tracking when they're too hot or when their phone is too hot, their personal phones and their work phones. When those get too hot, they will shut down, which may often leave you without accessibility when you're needing to utilize a chat function, GPS, if your car doesn't have GPS or you rely on your phones. You can see how this would immediately become of concern in a crisis. This is also a crisis when you have a lot of the population suffering from these weather events. So you're going to see heightened emergency calls, and you're going to need to be aware of the fact that your body is now in this worse environment trying to respond to people who are in a heightened state. So we have extreme heat and aggression. We know that those go hand in hand. So the hotter it is, the more likely it is that you're going to run into hostility out there on every side of the EMS. So this includes hospitals where people are coming in to cool down or need medical care. You might have more aggressive patients. You could end up with more water main breaks. So that's problematic for everybody. That yields shutdowns. So across the board, what I do with my products and fact sheets and graphics, I host a biweekly extreme weather working group where people, utilities, emergency management services, the different federal family partners, our national labs, our scientific community can all come together. It's completely open. It's the least stovepiped or red taped thing you're going to find that I can do. And what we do is people can come to the table and say that they're running into problems. They're struggling with something. They would like an advocation on their behalf. They need to find funding in order to do XYZ. And everybody there is looking out for each other in this rapidly changing environment to make sure that our people, especially our boots on the ground, are taken care of first.
So one of the most interesting graphics I saw that you put out recently was, of course, the cold weather and electric vehicle charging. A lot of some departments, shall I say, are now looking at the electric vehicle solution. Of course, we know from talking to our colleagues federally of the fire risk that happens to the sort of saltwater immersion of electric vehicles and their batteries. But of course, there are some challenges with recharging in the cold too, I think.
Yeah, there's both heat and cold degrade batteries, both for electric and for normal cars. What we're seeing across the board with the EVs specifically is during extreme cold, the charging stations take longer, which means you're sitting there longer, often with the vehicle powered off, which can lead you into a susceptible state. Same thing during an extreme heat event. You have updates that some of your vehicles may need to do in which they will shut down and become inoperable. So while I'm an advocate that we move forward in different climate resiliencies, there's definitely a piece there that we're moving forward with the awareness of additional threats that can come from embracing these changes. When you're putting in some of these EVs and there is a heat wave and your area doesn't have power, how are you annotating to those in the region? You can't charge the EVs here. They may show up on site and be unable to access. That can yield additional issues. EVs also weigh more than a standard vehicle does in many cases, which often they don't consider when they're coming into parking lots en masse. So during extreme heat, when your concrete and cement are more malleable, you could see more damage to the roadway, needing more repaving, more potholes in the winter. Your EV may actually end up hitting a pothole harder or exacerbating a pothole. So there's definitely a lot of advocacy that you're aware of the different risks that an EV brings to the table as a new vehicle, where some of these studies may not have been out there as much, but thermal cracking and thermal runaway with the batteries is a big problem in the heat. And then, of course, the reduction of energy capacity in the cold. The permanent damage comes from the heat, but the immediate implication to your capabilities comes in the winter when you have the reduced range and the longer charge times.
Every time I get on a call with you, Sunny, I learn something new, and I hadn't even thought about the relative weight of an EV against a regular vehicle. So there we go. That's my takeaway, one of my many takeaways of the day. So for EMS leaders around the country, and I have to say that when I spent 10 years in Richmond, Virginia, one of the maps on my wall was a blank map of the Atlantic Ocean, and what I was listening out for was some sort of disturbance in the Cape Verde Islands, because of course that was the butterfly, right, that flapped its wings, and obviously would then start to look at the invest number or the system forming, and then start to work out where the spaghetti track is going, and then we'd have these discussions over which way it's going to go. Is it going to defer into the Atlantic? And so I lived that for 10 years because you have to be prepared. But what advice do you have for EMS leaders in weather preparation?
So there's definitely a lot of people who want information quickly, and they would also like to learn on their own. So I don't ever advocate stovepiping weather data. I'm big on the free models, so I'll always utilize those when I do my products so that people can follow along on their own. They can cross-validate. Never put all your eggs in one basket when it comes to model planning. I don't like seeing on social media the people that go up and they show only like the GFS. Oh, there's going to be this monster storm, record-breaking this, that. Another one's going to form in 12 days and destroy the state. And you're like, 12 days out isn't really viable for a forecast of a low that's not currently present. So my big advocation to everybody, social media experts, those who are just enthusiasts, emergency managers, all of you that want to be able to look at these forecasts ahead of time, to be able to watch them develop, there's two big things to keep in mind. One, all tropical systems, all frontal boundaries can be visible at the 500 to 700 millibar level. That's that mid-range in the atmosphere. That's your steering flow. If there's a frontal boundary and a tropical cyclone, that explains why it rebounds away. It's important to look at the 500 and 700 millibars. You can pick one or the other, or you can look at both. But really looking at upper level winds, that's a big part of it. No forecast is going to be accurate in full if a low pressure center is not present. So the models will continue to overhype or underestimate or misallocate the path until the low physically forms. So a lot of the times when we're doing an invest, you see that giant swath that they cover because they're not sure where the low is going to form within that swath. Once it forms, the models will shore up and they'll become a lot more in line with each other. The only variance that can occur after that is likely due to a frontal boundary. So it gives you a lot more understanding, especially with tropical cyclones, the time frame it might take for it to get to your area, the ability it has for landfall, and the strength. If a frontal boundary is coming, usually decapitates the system. If there's no frontal boundary and it's crossing over warmer waters, then you can rapidly annotate for growth. So especially looking at the sea surface temperature maps, that'll help you as well, being aware of what currents do, what eddies do. A lot of additional research. I usually put all of that in my product that goes out because I know it's a lot for people to do all of that all at once. So I'll try to do my best to keep everyone updated on it too.
Good. And again, links in the show notes to some of the products. And of course, one of the issues I've certainly encountered when dealing with the sort of general public is, particularly when there's a hurricane or indeed the bands of a hurricane that may affect our area, is, hang on a second, it's a brilliantly blue sky, sunny day today. What are you talking about? And, trying to get that sort of message across that, yes, it is. And actually, after it's gone, it'll be a sunny blue sky day as well. That sort of, the sense of urgency to do something is always a challenge for public safety leaders.
Yeah, we have a lot of problems with our messaging across the board with knowing how to message, who to message. So not all, infographics work for everybody. Some different generations want to see XYZ within the graphics. Some other ones want to see a QR code or a website link or a video format. There's different learning styles for everybody as well. Some want more information, some want less. Some just want to know, when do I have to leave and what happens to me if I don't? How much water should I have in my house? How much food should I have in my house? What are the critical essentials that I actually have to have? At what point can I not walk my dog? Where can I take my dog if I do evacuate? What do I do if I need to evacuate out of the state? All of these different things that can come into play when you're making these decisions. So getting the notification out early, making sure everyone's aware that something is coming. Usually the better weather ahead of time typically dissuades people from evacuating, which is unfortunate because better weather would be your best window to evacuate. You would want a nice clear sky day to get from point A to point B, get settled, keep your family calm. You may lose some items in the home, and the last thing you want is panic. So if you relocate during the better part of the day, you can get settled and comfortable before the storm onsets. You don't want to be in your car during floodwaters. The vast majority of people who die in these weather events die in their vehicles. And they're usually evacuating too late. They drive into floodwaters. They don't think it's that deep. Their vehicle gets swept away. And I hate seeing that. I hate seeing our first responders at risk from that as well. The amount of search and rescue that shouldn't need to be done with these events, because we do see them coming. And what's the worst case scenario? You lose your home, you lose all of your stuff, but your body isn't going to stop the storm from doing the damage it's going to do. We had the same thing happen in California with the wildfires, right. And there's just so much advocacy you try to get out to the public that your life means so much more than what's inside your home. And we would rather see you safe and try to make you whole again than to lose you as a member of our society.
And actually, it's a very real command decision. And I've certainly been a part of this decision process, particularly in a hurricane situation, where you come to that point where you say to your own crews, okay, we're hunkering down now. And any call, and we get on the radio, we get on the television, any calls for service in the next 6 hours, we're not coming because we have to look after ourselves as well. And that's a tough call to make, but it of course is the right call to make. And it kind of says to those folk, you had your chance to get out, you didn't get out, now you're stuck too, and you have to hunker down, and we'll get to you when we can. And it's a tough one, but a very real command decision that EMS and public safety leaders have to make.
It is, it's very painful as an operational meteorologist. A lot of the forecasts that I did for our emergency side of the house. So our pararescuemen, for example, when you go to take a helicopter off, you can't fly a helicopter if there's going to be lightning. So if you have people who need to be medevaced or else because the floodwaters are coming at the same time the lightning is, but now you have the entire medical staff that want to get up into the helicopter during a lightning event, which everyone on the helicopter could die, and then the flood event could kill everybody else. So you have to say no. And you have to be in that position of authority to say the weather is just, it's not worth it for everyone to be at risk. Your odds of getting struck are far too high. If it does get struck, there's no safe coming down. Everyone's at heightened risk. You have to wait. You must be safe until we can get to you. So we train a lot of our search and rescue teams to be able to be okay themselves should they be out and the weather take that harder turn. In heat waves, we also can't send search and rescue helicopters. So in these major heat events, when we need to do medevacs, to be aware that helicopters and the lift in the atmosphere changes during extreme heat events. So if you're risking putting yourself out there in these worsening weather events, you're also risking your ability to have any interaction. If telecommunications goes down, if the emergency alert system goes down, power is obviously likely out and you're unable to go anywhere. You sit on the roof of your home and you have to wait. And sometimes you can wait more than a day and a half. At 3 days without fresh water, you're really risking mortality rates there.
And actually, I think very recently we had the discussion, particularly in the Palisades fire, where the water bomber aircraft and the Firehawks from LA County couldn't fly. Obviously, you've got Santa Ana winds, which people were describing as facing a blowtorch, to be honest. And of course, where are the helicopters? Well, of course, meteorologically, they can't fly. They can't do what you need to do. And then there's some degree of question on that. But I think the right decision was made to keep them grounded.
Yeah, we run into that a lot. I know General Society sees an asset, they see a problem. They did the same thing with the ocean water. Why can't we just use the ocean water to fight the fire? Well, then why would we ever use potable water? We would always just use whatever water system's right there. But when you put salt on the vegetation, you dry out the vegetation substantially over the next 6 months. So that would actually amplify your wildfire concerns for the rest of the year. So if you go and you pull ocean water as your default, yes, it's corrosive. But you also have the added problem of all the rest of the ecological factors that come into play. All of that runs off into the rivers. Your rivers are now at a higher salinity rate. All of your crops take major hits. There's a cascading threat that can come from that. And we get a lot of pushback where their response is that they're against the firefighters because the firefighters just aren't using the water there, or they're against the aircraft because, yeah, there's wind, but there's fire and you need to address it. But they can't risk coming down in those winds. And when you're looking at drones, some of these people are out there flying drones in the gusts of wind, and then the drone crashes into something, or it becomes a part of the debris being flung at 108 miles per hour down to the surface. That adds to the issue. You end up with spark, you could end up triggering additional fire threats. So we have this comprehension of problem solution, but we don't necessarily understand all the rest of the physical factors at play. The last thing anybody with an air asset wants to do is sit there and watch a city burn when their whole purpose is public safety, what they've been trained for, their engagement. I can tell you right now from briefing pilots, every pilot I know wants to be in the air almost perpetually. They will do anything to get fly time. They will argue with you about lightning. They will argue with thunderstorms. They will argue to get into the air. The last thing any pilot wants to do is sit this one out.
Actually, this is not meteorology, but I think we should mention the fact that there were 2 Canadair float plane water bombers that deployed to the Palisades fire. One of them was rendered unserviceable for a considerable amount of time because of a drone strike. And literally somebody was flying a drone and it flew into that aircraft, put a hole in its wing, caused it to be grounded. Fortunately, it didn't cause it to crash. But that's a very real issue we have these days of folk, flying their drone for the purpose of having a nose, as we'd say in England, over the event, and actually listen, get out, keep out, and let us do our job. I make that point because this is a very recent and very real example. I don't think we've had too many actual documented drone strikes of any type of aircraft. We've talked about that as a threat and actually happened in this particular fire, and it grounded an aircraft for some considerable time that could have actually contributed to the fighting of the fire. So I think we have to make that point right now. So my classic ending question I ask every guest on this podcast, Sunny, is there anything I've forgotten to ask, or right now anything you need to tell us?
Just that when we're talking about these weather events, we get a lot of misinformation that starts getting floated. We get why the fire started. We know it wasn't a lightning strike is a really good first stop, right? Like there were no weather events going on. When we look at why is there no rainfall falling? Well, there's a REX block in place. What's a REX block? Well, it's very simple. It fuels Santa Ana's. It lifts all of our frontal boundaries up and over to Alaska, which explains their 136 mile per hour wind gusts from a storm that rode that part of the carousel up and over and then into Canada where it dropped severe weather and then down through the US. You can track these lows across the entire northern hemisphere and the ones in the southern hemisphere. And you can look at them. You can see them coming. These weather events don't need to catch you so far by surprise that you believe that there is some ultimate conspiracy at play that's triggering the event, which is damaging every aspect of our built infrastructure. I know there were a lot of conspiracy theories about this area was burned on purpose because of railway that they wanted to put in the area. The railway was mapped in a similar spot. When they look at it and they overlay the maps of the red flag warnings, not the fires, but the red flag warnings over where they want to put that line, that's the built infrastructure. That's why we put the line in there. There's populations there. There's houses there. When we're doing red flag warnings, a lot of the people live in these areas that are at concern for red flags because it's the valleys. It's where the lush greenery was. It made the most sense to build homes back in the earlier parts of the 1900s when a lot of them were put in between like 1940 to 1970. So a lot of those homes don't have building code updates. That's problematic for wildfire spread. With the flood events, building codes also come into play. I recommend that you be aware of where your home, your infrastructure, your critical site sits in the building code side of things too. Are you actually hardened or are you grandfathered and not needing to harden and thereby susceptible to greater levels of risk when insurance is starting to become a bigger topic of concern for many states? It's not just California. It's California, Florida, parts of Louisiana, Massachusetts. This is becoming an issue for everybody.
Actually, and that's an excellent point. I know that colleagues in Florida have to have hurricane-hardened construction shelters. Folks in Oklahoma have to have tornado-hardened construction shelters as well. So obviously those factors are very, very real. So I think I've actually answered the question I posed at the start. Which channel do I get my weather from in an emergency? It's right here with Sunny. And Sunny, as you will see in the links, produces some amazing products, is also a conduit for a lot of other information and webinars and other sort of briefings that Sunny does. And I'll put all of those in the show notes. So for the moment, and I hope to have you back, maybe you can come and comment if we have we know there's going to be other weather events, but maybe you can come back and comment in the future. But for the moment, Sunny, thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So that was a weather-related EMS One-Stop, and I'm was delighted to have Sunny as our guest. So before I go, don't forget, make sure that you like and subscribe. Make sure that you hit that little check mark at the top of your iPhone, which says that you've liked and subscribed. So every time an episode of EMS One-Stop drops, you get notified that we are here. So that's it. Thank you to my guest, Sunny. I've been Rob Lawrence. This has been EMS One-Stop. Please like and subscribe. Until next time, bye for now.